Now, Mr. and Mrs. Hill, for your story. I believe it began on the night of the 19th of September, 1961, as you were driving home from a vacation in Canada, and something happened near Lancaster, New Hampshire. Which one of you was the first to see this something happen?
Betty was the first one.
Yes.
Betty, could you start the story then?
Yes. We were driving along on Route 3, and it was a very clear night, and the moon was very almost full and very bright, and the sky was very clear. We could see the stars easily. When suddenly, right near the moon, I noticed a new star, which was much larger and brighter than the other stars in the sky. And I called Barney's attention to this. Then suddenly, we noticed it started to move, and it went across the face of the moon. We stopped the car and got out to look at this, because we thought it was a satellite. And while we were observing it, it made a turn and started to come in our direction. And at this point, we changed our minds, thinking that it must be a plane. We were driving along, and as it came in closer, I began to realize that it was not a satellite or a plane, that it was something that I had never seen before. Now, this was based on its maneuverability, the way it was flying. It was had a very erratic flight in the sky, and as it came in closer to us, it was sort of riding along on the ridge of the mountains. And then when we got in the area of Indian Head, it suddenly swung out over the highway in front of our car. At this time, I could see a row of windows around the edge and a red light on each side. And it was at this point that Barney stopped the car, and he decided to get out to get a good look at it and to identify it.
So I got out of the car and took the pair of binoculars, 7x50 crescent binoculars, and stepped away. And as I raised the binoculars, looking over the roof of the car from my position on the ground, the object shifted across the highway, where it now, in making the shift, it also had a descent motion that brought it to what I roughly estimated as about 100 feet in the air. And then I began walking across the highway into the field. I walked quite a distance in the field, and I saw what I thought were figures standing by this huge plate glass looking back at me. I couldn't believe it. I dashed back to the car screaming to Betty that, oh my gosh, I said, it's going to capture us, is what I said. There was a series of beeps, and then later there was another series of beeps. And Betty asked me if I now believed in flying saucers, and I told her, don't be ridiculous, of course not. We continued then to proceed on to Portsmouth, and we arrived. We both felt very uncomfortable and clean. I don't think I mentioned to Betty how I felt, but I felt clammy, as if I had fallen into something very, very filthy.
What time did you come home? I understand there was a time factor that you were surprised that you had come home so late.
Well, actually, at the time, no, I wasn't surprised that we had arrived home later than really what we would have expected, because we didn't put any particular importance on our arrival time, except that we knew it was around 4:30. We should have arrived home at 4 hours. We arrived home in about 5.5 to 6 hours.
What were these objects on the back of your car that bothered you so much?
Well, when I went out to look at the car, to check it with the compass, as this physicist had suggested, I found some round, highly polished spots on the trunk of the car. When I put the compass near them, it just reacted erratically. And
spun around?
Yes. And then when I moved it away, the compass reacted normally.
We had been asked if others had seen these spots, and there are. There was a sergeant living in our apartment building at the time. He and his wife, they knew we had been on vacation, so they came down, and Betty told him she had gone out, and she was quite upset about what she had seen, and was trying to get me to go out, and I wouldn't, so they went out and took a look, and they came in quite excited, insisting that I go out and look on the trunk of Betty's car. So when I went out, I also, too, saw these large shiny spots. And I didn't put any, well, it wasn't important. They were just shiny spots. I didn't know how they got there, but I didn't try to even understand how they were there.
What next?
During the same period of time, well, about 10 days after the sighting itself, I had a series of dreams that lasted for about 5 nights. And these were somewhat upsetting and puzzling to me. At first, I thought of them only as bad dreams. But then when the scientists noticed that there was this period of time, then I began to wonder if my dreams might have been my way of trying to recall what had happened.
What could you tell us now about what was in those dreams?
Well, the dreams, briefly, in my dreams, we were driving along, we were stopped by a group of men on the highway, taken out of the car, taken aboard the UFO, underwent physical examination, and then were released. These were the dreams that I had.
How long after your mysterious experience in Lancaster in the mountains did you go to see Dr. Simon?
Well, this would have been in the latter part of 1963. The sighting was in September 1961. Mm-hmm. And so I was...
More than 2 years,
yes,
perhaps.
Yes.
Revealed to you. What story did you learn about your experience under hypnosis?
Well, there were the beeping sounds, and then I apparently went into some kind of daze, some kind of condition like this. And we're driving along, and Barney suddenly made a sharp left-hand turn off the highway, and we went around a curve, and there was a group of men standing in the highway. And under hypnosis, my first thought was, there must be an automobile accident. And then the car motor died. And Barney was trying to start the car. And he wasn't able to. And these men were coming closer. And they divided. And at this moment, I panicked. I became very frightened. I tried to open the car door, thinking I would get out, run and hide in the woods until they were gone. And just as I opened the door, they stepped over where I was.
Could you remember under hypnosis what these men looked like?
Not at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead.
Then they took me out of the car, and I went into sort of another deeper daze of some sort.
Kind of a trance.
Yes. And then I was more or less pulled myself out of this, or at least partially. And I found myself walking in the woods with a man on each side of me, and some in front, some behind me. And then in back of me was Barney, and he was like sleepwalking. And there were these two men more or less holding him up. We walked through this long path in the woods until we came to the craft that was sitting on the ground. We went up the ramp, and...
I might add, ramp was never mentioned in Betty's dreams, but both seemed to share the idea that we had been going up a ramp.
It was not in Betty's dreams,
no.
But it was the word that came out under hypnosis.
Yes,
that's correct.
Yes, so we went up ramp into this corridor that curved, and they took me into the first room, and they took Barney into the second room. And while I was in there, they did what we call a fairly simple physical examination.
Could you describe?
The first thing they did was they examined my arm. Apparently they were looking at my skin, and they seemed to be making a lot of comments among themselves, as if they were quite excited about this. And they brought over what I called, I've never seen one, so I don't know, but I call it a microscope with a camera attached. Then after that, they took hair samples on my fingernails. They checked my eyes, hair, my ears, nose, and things like this. And they looked over my hands and my feet, particularly my feet, quite thoroughly. Then they said they were going to test my nervous system. And they brought over some kind of a machine, which they touched.
Were you fully dressed?
No. They took off my dress and my shoes. And then during this, what they call the checking of my nervous system, I had a slip on, and they pulled my slip off and did this tester. And then the next one was the examiner had a needle, and I became aware that he was going to...
Jab you?
Yes, I didn't know if it was an injection or what it was. And I begged them not to use the needle because it would hurt. and he started to insert it into my navel.
A long needle?
It was a long needle. I don't know how.
This long?
It was, I think under hypnosis, I said 4 to 6 inches. But I became badly frightened when I saw the needle. And then when I found they were trying to put it into my navel, I became very frightened, and I begged them not to do it. And the leader said it wouldn't hurt. And they started to put it in, and it did.
Why were they doing it?
Well, he said it was a pregnancy test. And I said, well, it was no pregnancy test here. And when they seemed to be very surprised that I had any pain from this. And the leader put his hand out over my eyes, and the pain went away, but they stopped the test.
There was one man whom you called the leader?
There was one I called the leader, and one I called the examiner.
What language did you speak to them in?
I spoke in English. And I don't know what language they spoke in, but I understood them in English.
By word or sound or thought transference? Or?
I don't know.
You don't know?
No, but under hypnosis, it seemed to me I actually heard sounds. Although I cannot say it was English.
What happened when the examination was finished?
Well, then I was standing there waiting to go back to the car, because all during this time they reassured us that as soon as the tests were over with, we'd go back to the car. And so I was standing there waiting, and they said that Barney's examination was taking longer, and that I would have to wait for him. And then there was all this excitement, and this man came into the room and started tugging at my teeth. And I questioned them about this, and this is when they showed their surprise that Barney's teeth were removable and mine were not.
What were your experiences while Betty was in the room being examined by these man-like beings?
And I'd like to emphasize before I go into that is that this was brought out under hypnosis, because I am still a bit reluctant in this area.
And I think it is important to reemphasize that the story you've just told is one that you were not consciously aware of,
Never had,
but which was drawn out of you by your psychiatrist, Dr. Ben Simon, under hypnosis.
Yes. And it seemed as if I was carried up the ramp. My feet were banging against the ground as these small men I described came up to me and carried me from the car and through the woods and up this ramp and into this room where I opened my eyes. I saw a table. Betty described the table as being adequate for her to lie on, the room where she was in. And at this time, I do not know where Betty is. And apparently I am more concerned for my own welfare to be concerned about Betty. But the table that I described was small, and obviously the difference in our heights could be the answer.
Well, how tall were these men?
I estimate, well, I said they were about as tall as Betty, but this would mean that they
What are you, 5'1"?
about 4.5 to 5 feet.
I'm 5 feet.
5 feet.
Yes, and I'm 5'8", so that the 3 inches difference was quite a difference. And I said that the table was too small. Where I too was given an examination, I'm very conscious about my teeth. I was very upset about. I only got as far as saying something went into my mouth, and I did not bother to tell the doctor, and he did not press this as to what was happening, but I can only think now that this would have been when my teeth would have been extracted. And
Pulled out.
Pulled out. Yeah, I should have said pulled out because they're dentures. Yes, and so they weren't extracted, they had been. But I go on to explain that the kind of examination that I had been given is a scraping of the skin, and I had been turned over. They were interested in body openings, and a cup-like object was placed against my genitals. And I was reluctant to talk about that until Mr. Fuller was able to word it for me by saying lower abdomen. And this would have been the extent of the examination.
What do you believe now, Bunny?
Oh, I ask Betty first.
All right, Betty.
I believe we were really captured. I mean, if we were not captured, there was no face to the problem of what happened during these 2 hours of amnesia.
Well, this is what I'm forced, in a sense, to believe that something happened that night. I can't say definite as to what definitely happened, but apparently if the hypnosis which we were led to believe would be the means of opening up the amnesia, if this is not the facts, then what are the facts?